Sure, here's a powerful, emotionally charged speech in the style of T.D. Jakes, based on the title, Three Hard Truths Every Godly Woman Learns in Her Old Age. Loneliness is often misunderstood, especially by those who haven't walked the long road of obedience, heartbreak, and quiet trust. As a godly woman ages, she comes to realize that loneliness is not the enemy it once appeared to be. When youth fades and the voices that once surrounded her grow distant or silent, what remains is a sacred stillness that the world often fears. But in that stillness God speaks. In that quiet space heaven leans in closer. Loneliness becomes less about the absence of people and more about the presence of purpose. It's not the punishment for being forgotten by man, but the call to be remembered by God. The crowd may stop calling, but the Creator never stops whispering. In her younger years, the godly woman may have filled her days with gatherings, noise, and validation from others. She may have clung to the presence of people to avoid the discomfort of being alone. But with time, she learns that the most transformational moments in her life often came when she had no one else to lean on but God. It was in the quiet, not the clamor, where she found her strength. It was in the silence of the midnight hour, with tears soaking her pillow, that she discovered the voice of the Holy Spirit wasn't far. It was waiting for her surrender. Loneliness becomes a classroom. It teaches her to listen more deeply. It teaches her that prayer isn't just speaking but waiting. It teaches her that her worth was never in how many people called her name, but in the fact that God carved her name into his hand. She realizes that many things she used to run after, applause, approval, attention, were temporary comforts that distracted her from eternal truths. Loneliness strips her of the shallow, so God can pour in the sacred. And this kind of loneliness is not empty, it's full. Full of revelation, full of healing, full of quiet encounters that change the soul. In this place she no longer needs to impress. She no longer has to perform. She sits with her Creator, not as a woman who is trying to prove something, but as a daughter who knows she is already loved. What once felt like isolation begins to feel like insulation. God begins to protect her from things and people that once drained her spirit. He shields her from shallow voices so she can be shaped by divine wisdom. She also begins to understand that some assignments require separation. That there are moments in life when God calls you out of the crowd so he can deposit something in you the crowd was too loud to let you hear. The woman who once feared being alone now finds joy in solitude. She is no longer frightened by the quiet because she knows the quiet is often where God chooses to dwell. She's no longer threatened by the absence of people because she's held by the presence of the Almighty. There's a shift in her spirit where she stops asking, "Why am I alone?" and starts declaring, "Thank you for the stillness." With age and spiritual maturity, she recognizes the purpose in her seasons of solitude. She no longer interprets loneliness as rejection. She sees it as redirection. She stops mourning who left and starts focusing on who stayed. And in that focus, she finds that God never left her side. She learns to worship with no audience. She learns to pray with no applause. She learns to live with no performance. Because in that quiet chamber of solitude, she has become something she never expected, a woman whose faith doesn't need noise to be real. A woman whose strength was built in the silence. The path of a godly woman is not paved with comfort, but with refinement. The world often sells a version of spirituality that is easy, glittering, and filled with blessings that look like material gain, popularity, or smooth paths. But those who have walked long with God know that the most sacred places in life are accessed through struggle. Comfort does not grow character, ease does not birth endurance, and the presence of pain is not proof of God's absence. It is often evidence of His hand at work. A godly woman learns this truth not in a moment, but through a lifetime of pressing through seasons that didn't make sense, surviving storms she never saw coming, and enduring hardships that forced her to dig into her faith deeper than ever before. When she looks back on her life, she realizes the strength she carries now wasn't formed in comfort but in conflict. The tears she cried in secret watered the roots of her endurance. The nights she laid prostrate in prayer weren't wasted, they were molding her spirit. She doesn't just know Scripture, she has lived it. She knows what it means to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. She knows what it feels like to be pressed but not crushed, persecuted but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed. And it is through these experiences that her faith is no longer theory, it is testimony. Spiritual depth cannot be microwaved. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be fabricated. It is forged, and God often forges His daughters in the fires of life's unexpected trials. She may have lost things, people, positions, dreams, but what she gained cannot be measured. She gained a clarity that only brokenness can produce. She learned the sound of God's voice in the dark. She discovered that peace is not found in the absence of struggle, but in the presence of trust. There is a spiritual toughness in her now, not bitter, but resilient, not hardened, but holy. Her worship has weight because her wounds have depth. As she grows older, she reflects on the moments where she cried out, asking God to take the pain away, and now she sees that those were the very seasons where her roots went deep. She understands that God didn't answer every prayer the way she asked because He was doing something eternal. He was shaping her spirit, stretching her capacity, sharpening her discernment. The easy road would have robbed her of the treasure that came through resistance. The smooth path would have stolen the grit that now defines her. She no longer questions why the journey was hard. She embraces the process because now she knows that the oil in her alabaster box came from being crushed. She knows that the authority in her voice was purchased through pain. She knows that the wisdom she walks in today was carved out in seasons where she had to trust God blindly. And though the fire burned, it did not consume her, it refined her. She is who she is now not in spite of her trials, but because of them. There's a difference in how she carries herself, a quiet strength, a calm assurance, not because life got easier, but because she grew stronger. She stopped looking for quick fixes and started embracing divine formation. She no longer expects ease because she knows what it costs to become who she is. The battle scars are no longer shameful, they are sacred. Every storm that tried to drown her only taught her how to breathe underwater. Every loss that tried to destroy her became a lesson that now fuels her testimony. The pain didn't make her bitter, it made her bold. The struggle didn't steal her faith, it solidified it. There is a point in every godly woman's life where she realizes that applause is fleeting, and that the true weight of her walk with God is not found in how many people praise her, but in how deeply God is forming her, being seen, being praised, being celebrated. Those things might have mattered once. They may have given her a sense of validation in her younger years. But time, trials, and truth have taught her something far more valuable, that what God is doing within her is far more important than anything people may say about her. The applause of man is loud but short-lived. Yet the development of God is deep, lasting, and eternal. She remembers the days when people's opinions could shake her. One whisper of criticism, one misjudged word, one misinterpreted action could derail her peace and have her second, guessing her calling. But now she walks differently. She walks with her head high and her spirit grounded, not because of the opinions of others, but because she knows who she is in God. She has come to a place where she doesn't need to prove herself to anyone. The world's approval no longer holds power over her because she has seen how quickly people can turn. She knows what it's like to be praised one moment and rejected the next, and in that painful space, she discovered the consistency of her Creator. People changed, but God didn't. God began to show her that her identity was never in the titles they gave her, the roles she fulfilled, or the recognition she received. It was always in Him. Her value was set by the one who formed her, not by the ones who followed her. As that truth took root in her soul, something powerful began to shift. She stopped living for recognition and started living for revelation. She stopped chasing platforms and started pursuing presence. She no longer needs a room full of people clapping for her when she walks in. She needs the assurance that heaven is backing her when she steps out. This kind of confidence doesn't come easily. It is shaped in seasons of misunderstanding, molded in moments of being overlooked, and built in places where no one saw the sacrifices she made. She fed others while she was starving. She prayed for others while she was hurting. She showed up when no one clapped, served when no one noticed, and obeyed when no one understood. And through all of that, she learned that her audience of one was all that mattered. God was watching. God was taking note. God was using every unseen moment to develop something eternal within her. Now, when they lie on her, she doesn't retaliate, she rests. When they forget her, she doesn't fight for attention, she trusts. When they misunderstand her motives, she doesn't explain, she surrenders. Because she has learned that God defends the developed. She knows that if He is working something in her, He will eventually reveal it through her. And even if He doesn't make it public, it was never about visibility. It was always about transformation. She has stopped measuring her growth by how many people follow her and started measuring it by how deeply she follows God. There is a quiet assurance in the woman who has been developed by God. Her discernment is sharper, her spirit is settled. She doesn't run from hard truths or uncomfortable seasons because she knows they are part of the process. What God is forming inside her matters more than what people are saying around her. Her focus has shifted from external validation to internal sanctification. She understands that legacy is not built by applause, but by obedience. She is no longer building for applause. She is building for eternity. A woman who has walked with God through decades of valleys and mountaintops begins to understand that the opinions of people can no longer serve as the compass for her life. In her youth, she may have bent to fit expectations, softened her truth to avoid offense, or altered her behavior to win approval. But over time she realizes the futility of trying to please shifting crowds. She comes to the powerful realization that true peace, true purpose, and true power come from being in alignment with God, not in being accepted by man. The applause of people once made her feel worthy, but the silence of God in moments when she ignored His direction taught her that approval from others can never replace the guidance of the Holy Spirit. She learns that people are inconsistent, that their admiration can be conditional, and that sometimes their validation comes with invisible strings. But alignment with God brings clarity, it brings confidence, it brings a settled heart that no longer trembles at every rumor or crumbles under every misjudgment. She begins to live from a different place, not from pressure to please, but from a posture of obedience. The older she gets, the more she values the still, small voice of God over the loud cheers of the crowd. That voice has never led her astray. That voice has never manipulated her. That voice has never demanded she perform. And so she clings to it, trusts it, follows it even when it leads her away from people she once depended on. As the layers of external approval are stripped away, what remains is a woman who is not easily swayed. She no longer guesses herself when others don't understand her choices because she knows who she answered to in the prayer closet. She understands that walking with God sometimes means walking alone, that obedience might cost her relationships, that purpose might offend people who benefited from her passivity. She's okay with being misunderstood because she's not living for explanation, she's living for execution. The assignment matters more than the applause. Her steps are no longer driven by what makes sense to others, but by what brings her spirit into deeper agreement with heaven. There is a boldness that rises in her, not because she is arrogant, but because she is anchored. She's not performing to fit in. She's not dressing her convictions in palatable language to win popularity. She knows that clarity from God is more valuable than consensus from people. She stops asking, "What will they think?" and starts asking, "What did God say?" Because she understands now that people's opinions are often rooted in their own fears, limitations, and expectations, not in divine insight, and she refuses to let temporary opinions interfere with her eternal calling. She doesn't chase platforms or promotions unless they align with the timing and the purpose of God. She no longer compromises to be liked because she knows what it feels like to be approved by man and still feel empty. Alignment fills her, it grounds her, it simplifies her life. She doesn't have to wear masks anymore. She doesn't have to pretend. She doesn't have to carry the weight of who people want her to be. She can finally be who God created her to be, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Her life is no longer about being palatable, but about being prophetic. Every yes to God brings her deeper into peace, even if it brings her further from people. Every time she chooses alignment over approval, she becomes more free. She stops apologizing for the oil on her life, for the boundaries God told her to set, for the decisions He led her to make. She's not moved by opinions because she's standing in truth. She knows that alignment will cost her something, but it will always birth something greater than what it took. Her steps may not always be understood, but they are ordered. Legacy is not built in the spotlight, but in the secret places where obedience to God becomes a lifestyle rather than a performance. A godly woman, as she matures, begins to understand that it was never about being seen, celebrated, or remembered by the crowd. It was always about being faithful to the assignment given to her by the one who sees in secret. In her younger years, she may have thought legacy came through accomplishments that people applauded or milestones others recognized. But life taught her otherwise. She has learned that the most powerful parts of her legacy are not in what she did publicly, but in what she carried privately. Her prayers, her intercession, her sacrifices, her faithfulness when no one else was watching. She begins to see that her impact is not measured by numbers or accolades, but by the quiet obedience that created ripple effects in lives she may never see. Every act of surrender, every step of obedience, every time she chose God's will over her own, she was building something that would outlive her. The world chases visibility, but she has learned that visibility does not equal value. Some of the most powerful moves of God in her life happened in moments that were hidden from everyone but Him. And those hidden moments became the foundation of her legacy. Legacy is not about making your name great. It's about making God's name known. It's about laying down your pride so that generations after you can stand taller. It's about letting God use your life as a seed, not worrying about whether you get to see the fruit. She understands now that her legacy is not in her possessions or her popularity, but in her obedience. The times she said yes when it cost her, the times she held her tongue when she had every right to speak, The times she stood firm in truth when it would have been easier to compromise. These moments matter more than any platform ever could. She doesn't need her name in lights, because she knows her name is written in the Lamb's book of life. She doesn't need recognition from the crowd, because she has affirmation from the King. There is a calm that settles in her spirit, because she no longer feels rushed to perform. She walks slowly, steadily, surely, following the promptings of the Spirit, knowing that faithfulness today writes the story of legacy tomorrow. Her decisions aren't based on what's trending, but on what's timeless. She is not moved by the applause of people, because her aim is to hear one thing when she stands before her God. Well done, good and faithful servant. She's learned that consistency in small things is what builds legacy, the prayers prayed over her children, the forgiveness offered to those who wronged her, the meals cooked in love, the scriptures whispered in the dark, the worship lifted in pain, the word hidden in her heart. These are the things that last, these are the things that echo in eternity. She no longer concerns herself with quick results or public recognition, because she knows she's playing a longer game. One of generational impact, one of spiritual inheritance, one where the fruit may not even be visible in her lifetime, but the seed was planted in obedience. She has become content with being a vessel. She doesn't need to be the centerpiece. She's fine being the one who prayed in the background, who gave without credit, who obeyed without applause. Because she knows that true legacy is not about being remembered by people, it's about being used by God. And if her obedience can spark change in just one life, if her surrender can open the door for someone else's breakthrough, if her quiet walk with God can set a standard for someone watching, then every sacrifice was worth it. She lives to leave behind a trail of light, a testimony of faith, a legacy of obedience that shouts louder than any words ever could. The journey of a godly woman is not defined by ease, applause, or outward success, but by the quiet strength forged in seasons of isolation, the unshakable faith born in pain, and the wisdom carved through trials. She learns to walk with God in silence, to grow when no one is watching, and to obey even when it costs her everything. She no longer lives for the approval of man, but for the presence of her Creator. Her steps are steady, not because the road is smooth, but because her spirit is anchored. She carries a grace that only comes from surrender, a power that only comes from endurance, and a legacy built not on what she said, but on how she lived. Through loneliness, struggle, rejection, and obedience, she becomes a living testimony that faithfulness to God is always worth the price.